The recent video dedicated to style number 6 has evidently captivated the audience, prompting me to delve into the philosophy of Epicureanism, a competing approach, so to speak. Epicureanism takes its name from Epicurus, the founder of this school of thought. Like Stoicism, Epicureanism provides multiple perspectives. However, the purpose of this video is not to give a comprehensive account of this philosophy, but rather to initiate a reflection that will encourage your own explorations. Moving beyond stereotypes, some perceive Epicureanism as a pursuit of sensual pleasures, sometimes reducing this philosophy to a mere endorsement of life's pleasures, such as gluttony, drunkenness, or even excess in all forms. However, Epicureanism, when misinterpreted, is often wrongly associated with the excessive pursuit of bodily pleasures, such as lust. Epicurus himself stated that happiness does not lie in excess. According to him, we are sentient beings, experiencing through our body's sensations that oscillate between pleasure and pain. Pleasure, according to Epicurus, manifests in various forms, as does pain. This perspective invites us to seek a balance, rather than succumbing to the extremes of pleasure and suffering. Generally, we can categorize our sensations into two groups, pleasure and pain. Humans are naturally inclined to seek pleasure, drawn to what provides a pleasant sensation, and to avoid pain or displeasure. However, people sometimes make mistakes, confusing what is truly a source of suffering with ephemeral pleasure, a paradox often illustrated by tangible examples. Consider, for example, the allure of alcohol. Enjoying a glass of wine, then another, and perhaps finishing the bottle may seem pleasurable, especially if the wine is of good quality. This indulgence can bring momentary happiness. Similarly, yielding to the temptation of finishing a jar of Nutella can provide immediate satisfaction. However, the pleasure of these actions can quickly give way to pain, be it a hangover or a liver crisis, illustrating the negative consequences of such pleasures. Epicure teaches that the pursuit of happiness is not limited to the blind chase of pleasure. To achieve a state of lasting contentment, he advocates for moderation, stressing that pleasure must be tempered to avoid turning into pain. Thus, Epicureanism is primarily a philosophy advocating moderation. This approach can also be seen as a philosophy of balance. If this balance is disturbed, it means one is straying from the path of wisdom, getting caught up in an immature quest for pleasure, a pleasure we do not control and that ends up controlling us. In excess, happiness is unattainable. It is the fruit of moderate, measured, and balanced behavior. Epicurus established a classification of desires, highlighting an important distinction in semantics. Desire differs from pleasure. Pleasure is the fulfillment of satisfying a desire. A desire is an inner impulse that drives us towards something with the intention of acquiring it. In philosophy, the term object can refer to a person one covets, for example. Thus, when one aspires to a sexual relationship with someone, that person becomes the object of desire. Desire, as a force, is also a form of lack, as it manifests for what we do not possess. This concept aligns with Rousseau's thought, which stated that the object of our desire ceases to be so as soon as we acquire it, thus illustrating the ephemeral and elusive nature of desire. Rousseau believed that desire should be content with itself, seeing in this self-sufficiency the true essence of desire. However, desire must not be confused with pleasure. Pleasure is what results from the satisfaction of a desire. When we obtain what we desire, we experience pleasure. According to Epicurus, desires can be classified into different categories. He mentions natural and necessary desires, such as eating, which are essential for our survival and inherent to our biological nature. These fundamental needs manifest as desires because we naturally desire what we need. For instance, breathing is a fundamental need, and when deprived of oxygen, we desperately desire to breathe. Sexual desire, though a sensitive topic, is crucial for reproduction and the continuity of the species on a human scale. Epicurus argues that natural and necessary desires, like these, must be satisfied because they are vital and unavoidable. Then there are the natural but non-essential desires, which are not indispensable for our survival but are intrinsic to our nature. Earlier, I mentioned eating as a natural and necessary desire. However, relishing a rib steak with pepper or Roquefort sauce, accompanied by a glass of Pic Saint-Loup, pertains to gustatory pleasure, and is therefore natural, since humans instinctively seek what brings them pleasure. Is it essential? No, because to survive, a simple piece of bread and water would suffice. Nevertheless, the desire for more elaborate dishes exists. So what should we do? Since these natural but non-essential desires can be satisfied in moderation, we must limit their fulfillment. As the saying goes, consume in moderation. 1 or 2 glasses, but no more, aptly illustrate this notion. This leads us to the second category of desires, the natural but non-essential ones. Lastly, there are unnatural and unnecessary desires, like eating a rib steak with wine on a silver plate with gem-encrusted cutlery. For Epicurus, this exceeds the limit, constituting superficial and excessive desires that are neither natural nor necessary. This type of desire is seen as a degeneration, for it does not correspond to a natural need of the human being. This need manifests the moment an individual tastes it and fails to control this excessive or megalomaniac desire. Unnatural and unnecessary desires reveal an imbalance, even a pathology. Evidence of this is that, crossing the boundary of these desires, one slides into addiction. Alcoholism and drug addiction illustrate this with the gradual increase in doses to feel the initial effect again, a pleasure that fades with habituation, leading to further degradation. Epicureanism is not an invitation to unrestrained enjoyment. It is a philosophy advocating frugality and moderation of pleasures, reflecting the Greek tradition of self-control, balance, and rationality. Epicurus also paved the way for utilitarianism, a doctrine that emerged in the 18th century, influenced by Jeremy Bentham and further developed by John Stuart Mill, thus marking a philosophical turn towards maximizing well-being and utility. The Greeks had a term for the limitation of desires. They spoke of hubris, which occurs when the restraint filter is broken, leading an individual, man or woman, to exceed the natural limits in satisfying desires. This leads to a state where everything becomes an object of desire, without distinction. Excessive behaviors can illustrate hubris. Consider the example of a millionaire. His survival and that of his descendants are ensured, showing that he has reached a level of material success, both individually and collectively. However, if this millionaire aspires to become a billionaire, one must question his true motivations and unmet needs. Being a millionaire is not enough to quell the state of hubris. He always seeks more, a sign of a lack of serenity and contentment. Capitalism, which promotes perpetual growth, seems to embrace hubris as a principle. In such a system, Epicurus might observe that society is driven by those who are captive to their own excess, their hubris. The relentless pursuit of more, like the millionaire's desire to become a billionaire, is an example of submission to this devouring passion and the absence of moderation. For this individual, the notion of moderation has been lost along the way, illustrating a surrender to his disproportionate desires. Becoming wise becomes a major challenge when dominated by desire rather than mastering it. Without judgment or hostility, it is possible to find truly happy millionaires or billionaires. However, the problem arises when desire takes control, thus distancing from the pursuit of happiness and true wisdom. In one of my previous analyses, I discussed Alexis de Tocqueville's writings on democratic societies, where tyrannical figures are replaced by subtle guides who steer the populace towards a tacit acceptance of certain norms. The governability of a society increases when it directs itself, without external constraint. The transition from physical domination, characteristic of tyranny, to domination by desire, eliminates the need for direct constraint. The society is then free to follow its desires, especially if these desires are influenced to favor the consumption of superficial goods, as Epicurus would have qualified. Thus, a docile population is created, governed by its own cravings. This dynamic is particularly palpable in shopping malls, where the efficiency of the system relies on the encouragement to yield to consumerist impulses, revealing a submission to desires manipulated and encouraged by the surrounding environment. The act of buying, from a psychological perspective, often reflects a sense of lack, akin to what Winnicott defined as the transitional object. For a child, this could be a cuddly toy replacing the mother's presence, which then evolves into a desire for toys, and later in life, for other substitutes like cigarettes or alcohol. This illustrates the human tendency to seek externally what is lacking internally, a process far removed from Epicureanism and even utilitarianism. Utilitarianism acknowledges the pursuit of pleasure as essential, but admits that limiting desires can be beneficial. For example, the hangover after excessive alcohol consumption shows that immediate pleasure can have negative consequences. Rational calculation can lead to moderating one's desires to avoid subsequent displeasure. In modern society, often termed anti-limitative, the very notion of limit is sometimes seen as obsolete, especially in sectors where innovation and creativity are priorities. Nevertheless, on a collective level, the absence of any limit could lead to chaos. I am among those who believe that the need to formulate laws indicates that limits are indispensable to maintain order and prevent disorder. When the law is formulated and established, it is often because it is no longer instinctively integrated within us. It must be explicitly recognized and adopted. The ideal would be a lawless society where individuals govern themselves. However, in our reality, where autonomy is regularly ceded to authorities, legislation becomes indispensable. A child growing up without any constraints in a world governed by rules does not thrive in freedom, but can become problematic. I recognize that I have strayed a bit from the main theme, which will please some and displease others. Nevertheless, I encourage you to explore Epicurus's Letter to Menoetius, where he shares his perspective on pleasure, suffering, morality, and even death, a theme I have not addressed here but plan to explore later. My goal is to progress step by step. I hope to have sparked some reflection, and I thank you for your attention. See you soon.